Okay, so we should start now. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Professor Michael Ng. Michael is the chair professor of the Department of Mathematics at the University of Hong Kong. He is also the chairman of a joint AI research center between University of Hong Kong and TCL Company, which is a TV manufacturer in China. Michael is a SIAM Fellow and a Fung Kong Prize winner. He is also one of the top 1% highly cited mathematicians in the world. He is the chief editor of the journals Software Impacts and also the Journal of Computational and Applied Mathematics. He is on the editorial board of many journals, including SIAM Journal on Imaging Science and Journal of Scientific Computing. Many of us still remember Michael organized two big SIAM conferences in Hong Kong. One was the SIAM Conference on Imaging Science in 2014, and the SIAM Conference on Applied Linear Algebra in 2018. Both were very successful. Today, Michael is going to talk about low-rank tensor completion and its applications. Michael, it's your time.
Thank you, Raymond. Okay, thank you, Raymond, for the introduction, and also thank you for the organizer for this, OneWorld Imagine series. Okay, so today I'm going to share about this low-rank tensor competition. Let me see. Okay, so let me, using this the slide to visualize some of the so-called voice meaning of tensor. So it's not difficult to understand. It's just a multi-dimensional arrays. So you see here, this is a vector is a one-dimensional, and then a matrix, two-dimensional tensor, and then you see a cube. So this is you can see is there are three directions. Of course, that will be more difficult. Or here you just represent into the many cubes on one directions, and then 5D and 6 dimensions, etc. So of course that will be more interesting to visualize this. But you see that basically that is for tensor, that is you have the so-called a mode, or depends on the terminology you use. Sometimes we call it the order of the tensor. So you have a server order to describe the data into different direction, different mode, whatever. So now the question is how to describe the data efficiently. So in terms of applications, that is many possible data application. For example, like I just state a few of them, but I definitely, if you read many papers, then you can see that there are a lot of applications. So here is related to imaging. That is a video that is talking about spatial dimension and also the time dimension. So of course, one of the interesting thing is to track the people or know the movement. So you have the background and foreground to separate. So from the video. So this is a third order tensor, we call it, because you have a spatial dimensional, vertical and horizontal, and then you have the time. And then another very simple third order tensor is color images, because for color images, you have spatial dimensions. So again, and then you have RGB, red, green, and blue channels. So that is very simple, but third order tensor. So you want to do how to do the image processing, in particular for color image processing. Another bigger cube, instead of just RGB, you also deal with the different frequencies. Then again, you have a spatial dimension, and then you have the several frequencies. So it depends on the remote sensing technology. So typical is 100 something, but for some remote sensing tools that can be acquired more frequencies. So it depends on the technology. But I think this is another interesting data from hyperspectral data. So you get this, you want to do the processing, classification, and etc. This is one of the very typical application in hyperspectral image. So because for the satellite, when they acquire the data from the ground, you taking the pictures for different frequency mode, but because of the sensor maybe have some defects or some other artifact in the acquisition, then you will see this kind of in the hyperspectral images. So this is quite typical in hyperspectral image processing. So of course, one of the aim is to do the processing, how to compute this hyperspectral data. Well, that can be from many different forms, but of course, ultimate aim is we want to look the picture much better, so you can do a better analysis. Another is very common also in hyperspectral images is because of the cloud that affects for your looking at the detailed information about the skin of the hyperspectral image. So of course, one of the ways is to maybe with the help of other time, you look at the same skin, then can we somehow, predict back what is the missing pixels in these cloud covered images. So so you in some sense they are all the pixel you are missing, but you have a structure like the cloud or maybe the stripe in the pictures. So you want to recover the pixel. Okay, so this is like you can argue is an in-painting problem, but here we say that is like a competition that exactly we want to work out. So for images, so we know that how to process or do the image processing on the picture. So you will look at what kind of structure in the images. So for single image, you will see that we will make use of the repetitive patterns, redundant sampling, or the other. So actually, they all related to the low dimension structure. And for image, we know that this is a second order tensor, is a matrix. So then you know that this is just related to how to do the matrix decomposition or the so-called singular value decomposition. So if you have this image, then you can do the singular value decomposition. Because of this, then you can find out what is the so-called best representation of this matrix, or in another way, that means how to represent this image very efficiently and to describe it through these low-rank matrices. And this is true, I think, so far in the many research papers that have been discussed is why for images usually this is a low rank, at least not exactly, it's very close to low rank because of the highly correlated pixel among the appearing in the picture. So because of this highly dependence, so the low rank structure appears. Then of course you want to extend it idea to whether we can consider on the third order tensor, fourth order tensor that involve you have the spatial dimension, you have the RGB, you have the time, or even the many frequencies in hyperspectral images. So we want to suppose we have these missing pixels. Can we also recover the whole tensor? That means this hyperspectral image or video image or the color image, etc. Of course, we can argue that is can we do the this vectorization? That means try to rearrange the pixels from this third order tensor into a bigger picture. So that means in the matrix, then to do this low rank matrix recovery. Of course, we can do this kind of rearrangement. Okay, we can say that. Actually, in the later of the talk, you will see that this kind of the rearrangement of the entries is also can be quite useful, but we need to do it in another way or a proper way instead of just simply doing the vectorization. Because for the simple vectorization, or you just make a third order tensor of fourth order tensor into a simple matrix, a bigger matrix, you will break the inherent structures or the correlation in the original data. For example, in time, if you If you just arbitrarily rearrange it, that will affect the sum of the dependence. The same for the pixel value, even though we know that they are highly dependent, but how to exploit it? We just simply break this structure. Just say, for example, for this picture, you just column by column to move it in a vector. Then in this case, that will be break the structure and do not use the underlying the correlation in a better way. So this is why we consider the low-rank tensor recovery. So mathematically, we can form it into a so-called a competition or robust PCA or even the robust tensor competition. Basically, is there are some given entries in the tensor, and you want to recover it based on the so-called the rank, just like in this image case, because you expect that for an image, this is a low rank. So for a tensor, then that will be somehow the so-called the low rank tensor, okay? And of course, if you have some noise or wherever, you can using this sparsity term to try to describe this noisy term. So the question is how to define the rank or how to represent a low dimension structure in a tensor. That will be the key issue or the key problem. So in the literature, there are many, actually, we know that in the matrix, this SVD is somehow is universal, is very powerful. But for the tensor, then what is the best representation and such that we can find out the low rank structure inside. So there are many generalization from matrix to tensor. So here is just give you some idea. For example, in a three-way tensor, that means the third order one. So it's a cube. You try to decompose into this way. So this is like you forming three vectors, their outer borders, and then add them together. So each one is just like the Riemann tensor. We can say that. So it's not difficult to understand because without C1, C2, then this is just like the standard matrix SVD. So we call it CP decomposition. Another common one is called the Tucker decomposition. For this one, you see that we have again a cube, the third order tensor, and then you try to compress it because we know that they are all the data inside is very highly correlated. So we want to compress it into another third order tensor, but in terms of size, it's much smaller. So that means you're using a much more compact representation for this bigger tensor. But of course, you need to do some transformation. So here is U1, U2, U3 are some matrices. Somehow their columns are orthogonal to each other. So because of this, you can compress using this transformation to help you to compress the tensor. So this is called Tucker decomposition. And the nice way is you can do it very, in terms of the algorithm, can be done very simply by using a matrix SVD. In some sense, this is also Tucker. I can view it as a more relaxation of the CP because for CP, that is somehow, you can still writing down in the similar way into this form, but of course the G corresponding to CP, that would be like forming a diagonal in the cube. So this is why I say this is like more relaxation such that even though you cannot exactly compress the data into a very, very compact form in like the Riemann tensor, but in this case, you will have still keep some, the correlation, but hopefully they are not very strong compared with the original one. So this is the Tucker decomposition. Another, I think in the last 10 years, also another very useful decomposition is called Tensor SVD. So again, this here is an example to see how to visualize a third order tensor to compress into the so-called U star S star V. So star means the convolution. So that means instead of looking at the scalar or the number in a tensor, we look at as a cube, as a tube of this tensor, and then to try to do the convolution of the tubes so that you can formulate a U star S V. So the good thing you see that is something very similar to the matrix SVD because you have a U, S, V, something. Okay, and the UV are somehow orthogonal, and here is also the same. Even now the mathematical operation is a convolution of the tubes, but you can still keep the so-called under this operation. You can still define the orthogonality of this U and V as a tensor. And also here the S is just like the where cos looks like a diagonal form, but of course now instead of looking at number, we look as a tube, a set of numbers. So you still form a diagonal form of the tubes. So it's very, very close to this matrix SVD, the analog. So this is why highly correlated, I mean, in terms of the usage in the matrix SVD. But you will see that we're so close, Ben. But what is the significance? Because now instead of the standard like the scalar multiplication, now is the convolution in terms of this operation. So this particular useful for image processing or signal processing because convolution is basically is a fully transformed. Then that means you can use a fully transformed to operate on the data and process data such that you can get this compact representation of the original data. Okay. In other words, you can imagine you are doing a fully transform along the tubes of this tensor. So you get the frequency components of this data cubes, and then rearrange it into a based on their importance to get these diagonal form. So this is why this is so useful in particular when you deal with the image and also the signal type data, because the fully transformed can help you to rearrange and find out what is the frequency components in the data. And you can still define the range of this TSVD or the Tensor SVD, because you just count how many number of non-zero tubes in this diagonal form. Because now instead of numbers, you're looking at a tube, so you count number of tubes. So you define the so-called tuple range. And in terms of computation, it's also based on FFT and SVD. You can get this representation, and this is true for every, the order of the tensor. So this is in terms of representation, is very powerful. So here I just show you an example for hyperspectral data for different bands. Then if you're using a different how many number of tubes to represent the data, this is 1 and 5 and then 10 and 20 and 40. So you see that you just use sufficient number of tubes, you can reconstruct the original data. So now, remember, we still need to answer this question, how to represent the low dimensional structure. So here is, we compute the range. So now we can compute the CP range, we can compute the Tucker range, we can also compute the tuple range in the representation. So in order to solve this mathematical problem, of course, you can do the realization. Even the tuple range is still hard to, because you are doing the counting, so it's still very difficult to deal with. So you can do some realization. So basically, you consider the tuple nuclear norm. So this is just the nuclear norm of all the fundamental slices of these transformed tensor, and then L0 by replaced by L1. And then this is a realization for solving the problem. And mathematically, we want to see under what kind of condition and we can recover this tensor exactly. So we need to assume saying that somehow the so-called tensor incoherence conditions, and suppose this is underlying, of course, should be low rank. Then if this rank is somehow less than this n over log n square, then you can still recover it exactly. Suppose you're taking the observed entry independent correct with the probability gamma, and you only observe partially of the data, and this partial observations is controlled by this rho. Okay, so the m is the total number of your observation. So this is somehow very close to the matrix computation result. So if you're familiar with these matrix incoherence conditions, so more or less the same, except now you deal with instead of the matrix case, now you deal with is tensor, and also you do with the convolution operation. Okay. So this is the transition diagram to show that for different gamma and different rows, and also the range compared with the n. So suppose now is a deal with a third order tensor, is n by n by n. So what is the ratio? If it's a low rank tensor, is you can recover. So here it means the right region means you can recover successfully up to some numerical tolerance in the numerical setting. That region means it's not successful. So you see that when your gamma is lower and the rho is larger, then of course the rank R somehow is low, then that will be, you can easier to recover the underlying this low rank tensor. And so more, I show more pictures. So you see that this is a color image denoising. This is our method. So you see that is in terms of the visual effect, we are much better compared with the others. So this is noisy one. Okay. So we also compare with other method like the SNN. This is based on the sum of the nuclear norm, and also the like the matrix version of this competition and also PCA. So you see that here is somehow visually you can get a better result. And also the PSNR or SSIM, this is also better compared with the other method. So this is average result for a color image database. We compare all the methods. So this is somehow the comparison numerically. And we also apply to this the background detection, that means the foreground and background. So we want to recover this is the input data. So you have only, I think in this case, it's only 20% of the data, and then you try to recover it as a video, okay, for this case. So you see that visually we have a better result compared with our competitor. So this original picture, of course, we still cannot recover everything, but still looks very good compared with the RMC. And this numerically show that for different observation rate and also the different method. So again, here is accuracy on the recover, the percentage, something like how correct is. Okay, so you will see one of the problem is about the computational issues in this in our relaxation, or in the Tensor SVD. The case is you need to do some SVD computation. Can we avoid it, or can you reduce the computation? So of course, one way is to consider like the tangent space to do some inexact computation. Another way is doing some more randomized algorithm. So in here, I should just show you an example is one way to try to, to reduce the computational time is doing this random projection of these data. Here, I show you a hyperspectral image as an example. So this is a clean image. We have a noise, and then compare with the other method. There are some tensor method. There are some also the matrix computation method. There are some weighted LP long method like this one. And this is our method. So visually, you see that is we can recover much better actually by our method. But here, we only work on the using the random projection. So you see that here is in terms of PSNR and another measure, we are quite good. But in terms of time, we can reduce significantly, okay, compared with even the, this is a tensor-based, one of the tensor-based version, okay, method. And here is we can reduce the computational time. So I think this still an open problem is, for example, as long as you deal with the competition, if you use the SVD, how to reduce the computational time, I think it's still a very interesting problem computationally, how to deal with it. So now another question I want to explore is to how to deal with how to obtain the low dimensional structure. We mentioned that we can using this low rank tensor, okay? We assume that tensor SVD is very good to get this low rank structure. So can we have other way to get the low rank structure? So actually we need to somehow you can say to model the data or model your optimization problem, or even how to manage or rearrange your data such that you can have a more significant low rank structure or low dimensional structure in your data, so that you can hopefully help you to recover your missing pixel much more efficiently. One idea is that we can use weighting. That means, for example, this is a color picture. So in the in-channel red, green, blue, you somehow put the different weight such that you can get a much better low-rank structure inside. Of course, the weighting, how to determine is still you can formulate the optimization problem. Actually, in this paper, we do it in this way. But you still need to how to determine the weight properly, such that we can have this of course singular value can be significantly. In terms of the low rank structure is more significant. So this is still an interesting problem, but we using this weighting idea instead of the original data. Based on the data, can we adaptively to create a weight such that the weighted tensor has a low rank structure. Okay, so this is a very one of the, you can say, through the modeling, through the optimization, and then to see how to get the much better low dimensional structure. Another way is doing the transformation. That means in the Tensor SVD, we use the convolution. Can we generalize it to doing the another, in general, a transformation? Okay, here is we consider a unitary matrix. So because when you deal with the convolution, this is a full line matrix. So this is just a unitary matrix because it is a discrete full line transform matrix. So we extend this idea to the unitary transformation. So and then also get this Tensor SVD structure. Then we can still define the transform tensor nuclear long, and just here is give you a very simple example to demonstrate that the Fourier is a very global transformation to rearrange your entries such that you can get a low rank structure. But even you use the wavelet, very localized, simple transformation. This is of course a half wavelet is orthogonal in this sense. So you can still get very good result in terms of the recovering the relative error compared with the Fourier. So you see that is this idea to use the transformations to help you get a much more better rank structure is another way to study the problem. Okay, here is show you more picture. So this is original hyperspectral data. This is observed image. So in this case, it's only 10% of the data, and this is by a convolution Fourier transform. Here I show you the wavelet transform, and also the U is more data dependent because wavelet is here is we use a D4 4 wavelet, and this is still a fixed basis to represent the data. So here is we use the adaptive based on the observed data to try to find a better basis to represent these tensor data, the tubes. Okay, so this is we call U is a more data dependent. So you see visually is very good, and also in terms of PSNR is much higher. Here, how to do it is actually is also not difficult because remember we need to using the tubes to rearrange the data, just like in the convolution we do the FFT on the tubes. So here is we try to do is the doing unfolding on all the tubes and then find out you can say we apply one SVD to find out what is the best basis to represent all these tubes, and then we just using this U into the transformation. So this is more adaptive to the data. So again, this is another picture for to show you the U wavelet and Fourier and compare with the PSNR, and visually you see that it's much more better because we have the ground truth to simulate the picture. So you see that this is much better. And we can see that from the singular value distribution from the Tensor SVD and also the tuple entries, you can see that if you're using the U, that is a more if you're using the U, that's a more small singular values compared with the others, compared with Fourier or wavelet. Actually, the wavelet actually is much better than the Fourier. You can see again there are more small singular values. So in certain sense, that means because you deal with the real image, you don't expect that will be exactly low rank structure, but you can say that if you're using wavelet or even using this data-dependent transformation, you will get a much closer to a so-called exact low rank, because most of the numbers or in this tuple rank structure in the diagonal form, they are very small. So in certain sense, that is help you to discover this low rank structure. So you can still extend this theorem from the convolution case to this general transformation. So suppose you have this transformation, you fix it, then of course this underlying low rank will be determined by your transformation. Okay, so in some sense this R is depends on your phi. So that means if you chose a proper unit transformation, and suppose this underlying you still have this tensor equivalence condition, you can still get this the same result as what we have discussed in the convolution case. But of course, the R for different transformation, they are different. This is the most important part. Okay. So in some sense, it means that this how the CR, the constant, or the other, they are different on the different transformation. Here, I show you a picture to demonstrate this. This is again is a hyperspectral data. So let us look at this first row, because this is another picture, just another hyperspectral image. So you see that we're using the FFT, DCT, or data. So you see that they are represent actually the index of the pans. That means the matrix slice, and then what is the corresponding rank? Okay, the structure. So you see that is now for the different epsilon, the cutting point on these so-called small entries, we cut it. You can imagine. So you see that is if you consider the like 70% actually. That in this case, you have this bad line that is very close, and actually you only have a large rank in here. Okay, compared with other truncation, you see that actually the TSVD based on the data dependent transformation, they are much better rank structure compared with the FFT and even the TCT in this case. So if you look at this, that will tell you what, if you look at the back line here, what you see is actually, even you have the tuple rank structure, but in the tubes, in this inch tube, actually most of the entries are very close to zero. So because of this reason, you can only using a several numbers in the tubes to represent it, okay, in your Tensor SVD form. So because of this reason, we can further refine your incoherence condition. And suppose this only all these important components are governed by the summation of all the RI, okay, by this. Then we say this is refined incoherence condition. Then you can still prove that you can refine the sampling requirement. The result can be improved. Instead of the n square log n square, you will get the like some constant depends on this. What's the rank structure by this transformation, and then the n log n square. So that means if you deal with the n by n tensor, you only need n log n samples is sufficient for you to recover the data. Suppose you satisfy these incoherence condition, refined in tensor incoherence condition. And this is actually a comparison of the sampling requirement on the several different papers, on the different sampling method, incoherence condition. And this is our previous tuple rank, and then this is like the multi-rank, okay. And this is get the n log n like the sampling requirement. This is a related reference. So they're from different groups to work on this sampling requirement. Okay, so I don't repeat this. So you see that now I just consider the sampling is n log n square, and then times some constant, okay, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. And then to compute what is the under this sampling size, then what is the PSNR of the recover by different methods, and also the computational time. So of course, one of the method is by Ming Yun, the group in Columbia. So the method is saying that is to n to power 3/2. So this is a very significantly less than n squared. That means, So, but turns out we find that the method is require a lot of computation in terms of time. So here is we show you the time is quite high. But if you compare with the TSVD on our data-dependent transform, so we are significantly smaller in time. Of course, at the same time, where PSNR is also much better, okay, compared with the other method. So that means under this n log n square, the sample size, we find that our method can be achieved. Okay. Of course, this is a real data, so so you don't expect exactly low rank. So that will be we still can only make a numerical comparison to see what are the results on the different methods. I show you the picture, so you see that on the this original picture, this noisy picture, and then this is for a different method. This is a data dependent one. So you visually also see this. This is why this is true, and this is a more numerically effective. Okay, this is for video data, so I don't think I need to repeat. So I need to keep. Okay, another way to drive the low rank tensor is, as I say, you can by the modeling on the rated tensor, and also you can do by using the optimization tricks to do it. So one way is to do it is instead of doing the convex relaxation, you do exactly like the long convex model to represent this low rank structure. So in some sense, is try to get a more sharp the rank structure such that you can recover. So we can derive some error band for this under, of course, under some assumptions. So this is also, you can do it by long convex model actually. We can still get a quite good results, I mean, theoretically. Okay, so can we also another method to construct the low rank tensor from the data? So actually, I have already discussed about the global low rank structure based on CPE Tucker, or even in my talk is focused on Tensor SVD. And I mentioned the transformation because we're using the unitary matrix as a transformation and just finding what is the best representation on the tubes data. So you can imagine if you deal with the image, if you deal with the signal data, then of course you can consider more powerful representation like the framelet or dictionary. So this is exactly we want to demonstrate to you. So if you're using the framelet, I think this one is we're using the spine one. So if you look at again the singular value distribution again from all the tubular on the numbers, then you see that again when you're using framelet, that would be more small singular values. So again, that's tell you that you have a much closer to a low rank structure. So that means the framelet is also help you to get a much better the low rank representation in the tensor. But of course, one of the difficulty is you need to deal with the non-invertible transformation because it's no longer invertible. Because of framelet, you have a redundant basis actually to represent the tubes. So in this case, we just pay the trick on how to do this optimization. So in the convolution, you're just using a full line matrix, multiply on the tube, and then to undo the folding again. So here is we just using the sum of the framelet transform and operate on the tubes, and then do the folding back again. So and then to define this the so-called the framelet tensor nuclear norm, something like that, and then solve this optimization problem. So somehow that means the unitary is not necessary. So you can using the optimization trick to help you to avoid to involve this invertible the transformation. So this is the trick, and just show you again by different method, and then this is the ground truth. So you see that because of the framelet, so you can represent the data much better. And this is a video. So you see that this is our result, and this is a ground truth. Compare, you have some missing, not very good. Okay, in terms of the different. This is related to these corruption rates. Okay. Another idea is you can extend it even. Okay, we mentioned that I learned this the best basis based on the SVD, the data dependent. Why we do not consider more redundant dictionary? I mean, to learn the basis to represent the tips, so that we can have much bigger room for us to to represent the data such that we can drive the low-rank structure. Here the diagram to show you that this is the full line matrix. So this is the fixed basis, and here is we're using the adaptive learned dictionary to try to get what is the representation of this data. So also learn the dictionary. And visually, again, you see that this is a much better details you can recover. Okay. Or again, the non-invertible problem is also can be solved similarly like in the framelet case. So this is also another pseudo color pictures. So you see that this is hyperspectral data. So this is original data, and this is a use of our dictionary-based representation. So you see that much clearer compared with the other the details. Okay, so for transformation, framelet, or dictionary, we deal with on the types of the data. Say, for example, third-order tensor. So you deal with the types on the transformation, framelet, dictionary. So, but you will ask the question, why we only focus on the types? You can also consider other direction because you have the spatial dimension. So actually, another idea is why you do not consider other direction, like the coupled transformation, we call it. So that means you're using a spatial filter to say, for example, you deal with the red, green, blue pictures. Then for the red channel, you're using a spatial filter to deal with the spatial domain to get the representation. And after that, you further using the convolution, maybe the wavelet or maybe even framelet or the other, to further, you can say the convolution plus KL, this transformation is basically the Tensor SVD, okay, depends on the transformation or the framelet you use to further decompose the data. So in some sense, you couple the transformation is you consider both a spatial domain, the transformation, and also the another types, the transformation combined together such that you can get a much better the low-rank structure. So hopefully you can recover the data much more easy way. So this is again to show you the, in particular for color image, I think this is you can imagine if you only using RGB as a tube. So this is not the huge amount of data for you to deal with. You can do the couple transformation. That means the spatial filter to help you to further process to get a low-rank structure. So you see that here is the ground truth, and this is our CT-LRTC. So you see that well, of course we cannot get 100% recovery. I mean, because this is noisy data and also corrupt data. So but compared with the other method, we can get a much better details. Okay, compared with this ground truth, you also see that is another picture. Okay, this is another yeah, like the more in-painting picture. You try to using this computer transform to help you to recover it. Okay, so something. So you see that the detail is somehow much better compared with the other method. Okay, so. Well, as I mentioned at the beginning, we should rearrange the data, but it's not just simply doing vectorization or matrix Y on the tensor. We can rearrange the data in a much better form. So we can do some data accumulation and also non-local similarity to do it. So one way is to consider is the like you're doing a multi-scale features to generate more data, because the original the data maybe have spatial, time, or also other effect. So you're using a multi-scale feature, I mean the filter, to get this kind of, to generate the particular features, maybe related to the spectral features, maybe related to the temporal features or spatial features. Then after that, that means you somehow in this spatial domain, I mean spatial domain, temporal domain, you get some important, the hidden structure. And this hidden structure you can represent, of course, by the matrix or by the Tensor SVD, by this low-rank structure. Then you combine them all together. So this is like the multi-scale feature tensor. So so this is the way we consider. And then we found that it's not just the computation or the denoising the data. Actually, we work on the phase image and then apply this Gabor transform on it. And because the Gabor transform can help you to get the features in different orientation or the other. So because of this, first of all, you can get a much better image recovery. This is input observe the data. And second is you can also, in the second step, when you do the image analysis, that can helpful. Because why? Because when you do the image analysis or classification or clustering, you may using some hidden structure, okay, inside the data, maybe spectral or maybe temporal or spatial features. So actually, in the process is exactly you recover this kind of the hidden features into different domains, and that's help you also to do the classification or even for other pattern recognition purpose. So I think this is another way to not just simply solve the computation problem. So here is, I mentioned, we use the Kappa transform and show that what is the so-called record. Here actually is talking about classification accuracy can be enhanced somehow compared with the other method. Okay, if you consider some noisy data. So another is a non-local similarity that is based on non-local. You combine all the similar patch and then put together and do the processing. So this is another way to rearrange the data. But for tensor, sometimes we need to use a more trick. It's like you formulate a much bigger tensor. You need to use the TT-RAN to consider the problem together. Okay, so this is a video data. We show that this is another good idea. Okay, so another idea is you can using the deep cut and pay prior using the deep learning to help you to regularization to help you to get a much better picture. You can also using like our classical total variation prior to recover the data. Okay, so I think because of time, I better stop it, almost stop it. So in here, the summary is we report the tensor computation results and also some application in related to hyperspectral images. In particular, in this talk, I discussed how to construct the low-rank structure. That may be other constraint. I think that would be interesting. For example, non-negativity, TV, and regularization. Of course, I think there's some papers discussing how to aid the other constraint or the other regularization in the problem for tensor computation we are talking about. But exactly what kind of theoretical result we can generate. That means if, for example, if you have a TV regularization plus this low-rank structure, can we prove that that is we can have this theoretical error bound to recovery? So I think this is still a very, very interesting problem to look into in the future. And then here, finally, I would like to thank my collaborators and here so that we can have some very interesting result to be presented today. Okay, finally, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Michael, for this very interesting talk. And now we are open up for questions. You can just, well, if you have questions, you can either type them in the chat box or in the question and answers box. And then I can unmute you so that you can ask the question directly, or I can read it out for you. So I have a question in the question and answer box, but it's from an anonymous attendee, so I have to ask the question. Would ask in these various image analysis, would ask in these various images analyzed, what is the range of the ratio of detected low rank, total rank on 0, 1? I don't know if you
maybe not. I do not understand what you mean by 0, 1. Okay. So, but I can tell you that for the images, actually this is not exactly low rank, but we find that it's very close to low rank. So, like I think I can show you back the picture, and you will see that. Okay, sorry. I think here I demonstrate using a Tensor SVD, using the Fourier transform convolution or even the data dependent transform. So depends on the truncation. You will see that the range is somehow can be quite different, but you cannot be exactly low rank. So but you see that is some of the numbers are very close to 0. That means some of the band. So if you using the truncation properly, something like that.
Okay, I don't know if the attendees want to follow up on this, but if so, then you can ask the question again in the question and answer box. I have a question from Quisoila, and well, you can unmute yourself and then you can ask the question directly. Please unmute yourself, Quisoila.
Hello, I don't have a question.
Oh, okay. I see your.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
I probably pressed my hand by mistake. Sorry.
Okay, it's okay. So, any other questions? Yeah, I have a question for Michael. So, in your coupled, you mentioned that you in your coupled transformation. So where you use this spatial filter plus this the standard transformation. So I would like to ask, is it similar to well, you just replace the Tensor SVD, the convolution in the Tensor SVD by like a two convolution together? Is it similar?
Yeah. How to say? Well, because the Tensor SVD is on the convolution on the trips. Okay, but so you can imagine now the RGB. So you just operate the convolution on the RGB. But here is we first on the major slide on the R, we using the filter to get a set of the pictures. Okay, you can imagine this is like the maybe the wavelet or the other, okay, or the other filter. So you will have the many slides on the red channel, okay, and then you further because they are green, you apply the same filter, so you align it again, so you will have another I mean the bigger the RGB. You can imagine. Because of this reason, you can still apply this Tensor SVD on this bigger one. So here is the coupled transformation meaning.
Okay. So any other questions from the audience? Yes.
Bob.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Bob has a question. So Bob, I'm going to unmute you, and you can ask the question directly, Bob. Bob, can you unmute? To ask the question. Or there is another. There's a question. Question from NCM. So I'm going to unmute you. Maybe NCM, you can ask the question. NCM, do you have a question? You can unmute yourself and ask the question.
That's Bob.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm Raymond and Michael. Michael enjoyed your talk, and one segment where you were doing, I suppose, dimensionality reduction. Were you doing it on the bands or the pixels or a combination?
Bob, your question is when I handle the picture using a dimension reduction.
Yes.
Then how to relate the frequency band and also pixels? Your question is.
Are you working with the bands of if you do it on the hyperspectral data, are you working with the bands? It's a band reduction method?
Yeah, so actually, you for example, in using the framelet, then we apply the framelet on the inch tube. That is, you can say that is on the frequency band, and for inch pixel. Okay. After that, we do the you can say folding back again, and we apply this SVD on the spatially. But of course, this is not exactly the spatial domain because you have already applied the transformation on the tubes. So in some sense, you are combine the both. I mean the bands and also the pixels together to get this low-range structure.
All right, I'll look that over and look at your references and if I can find some. Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? If no, then we thank Michael for this very interesting talk, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you,
thank you everyone. Have a good day.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, bye.